My fiancée cheated with my younger brother in our bed. Years later, she's still begging for help with his child. But I gave her the info to destroy my brother, and now my mother will never forgive me. I'm 35 years old, I'm a lawyer, and I haven't spoken to my mother or younger brother in 3 years. People always ask me why, like it's some terrible thing to cut ties with your family, but when I tell them the full story, they usually shut up and understand. I mean, it's not like I woke up one day and decided to be the terrible son who abandons his mom. It was more that they made choices that basically left me with no option. You know what I mean? It all started like 4 years ago, when I was still engaged to Cassandra and my life was, let's say, normal. Well, as normal as the life of a lawyer who works 60 hours a week can be, but it was my normal, and I was fine with that. Cassandra and I had been together for like 5 years when we got engaged. She was also a lawyer. We worked at different firms but in the same building. And we'd met at one of those boring corporate law conferences where everyone pretends to be interested but really just wants the free coffee and to network. The thing is, she was smart, ambitious. We had the same professional goals, and I thought I'd found the right person to build a life with. You know, the house, the kids, the dog, that whole package you're supposed to want. We planned the wedding for August. My mother was super excited because it was going to be at this really elegant place that cost a fortune. And everything was going well until like 6 months before the wedding, Cassandra lost her job. It wasn't really her fault. Her firm was cutting staff and she was one of the newest, so they let her go with a decent severance, but it was still a hard blow for her. Cassandra was one of those people who defined their worth by their work. So when they fired her, she sank into this kind of silent depression where she kept smiling and saying she was fine, but I could see she wasn't. I told her not to worry, that I made enough for both of us while she found something new, that she should take her time, but she insisted she needed to do something productive. So she enrolled in this pottery class, liked to keep her hands busy while she sent out resumes. And at first I thought it was a good idea, because I saw her more animated when she talked about her clay projects and stuff. What I didn't know, and I should have suspected earlier, was that my brother Hunter was also taking that same class. Hunter is 3 years younger than me, so at that time he was like 28, and he's always been the complete opposite of me in terms of responsibility and maturity. Where I studied law and worked hard to build a career, he basically went from job to job without really committing to anything, still lived with my mom, and his idea of a serious relationship was dating someone for more than 2 months. My mother adored him anyway. I think because he was her baby, and because she always had this need to take care of someone who needed her, and Hunter definitely needed her because he couldn't even pay for his own phone without help. I'd accepted long ago that my mom simply had favorites, and I wasn't one of them. Which is fine, I guess. Or at least that's what I told myself. So it turns out Hunter and Cassandra started spending a lot of time together in this pottery class, and then they started going out for coffee afterwards, and then sometimes they'd go to lunch, and I didn't think much of it at first because, I don't know, who suspects your fiancé is going to cheat on you with your own brother? It's like something so cliché it doesn't even cross your mind that it could happen to you. But I started noticing weird things like in March, like 3 months after she started the classes. Cassandra was on her phone all the time, smiling to herself. And when I'd ask her what was so funny, she'd say, "Oh, nothing. Just a meme Hunter sent me." And I'd think, okay, great. My brother and my fiancé get along well. That's good for the family, right? But then she started going out more often without me, always with the excuse that she was meeting up with Hunter because she needed advice about something, or because they were going to work together on a pottery project. And I started feeling uncomfortable with the situation. One night in April, I remember perfectly, it was a Thursday, because I'd had a terrible day at work with a particularly difficult client. I came home and Cassandra wasn't even there. She sent me a message saying she was with Hunter, watching a movie at the cinema, because I was working late anyway, and something in me just exploded. I wrote back that we needed to talk when she got home, and when she finally arrived, like at 11 at night, we had this huge fight where I told her I thought it was inappropriate that she spent so much time with my brother, and she got super defensive, saying I was being controlling and insecure. She said things like, "Patrick, Hunter is your brother. Do you really think something would happen? And it's not my fault. You're always working and never have time for me." And basically made me feel like I was the bad guy for being uncomfortable with the situation. So I apologized, because that's what you do when your partner makes you feel like you're being irrational, and I tried to be more understanding and present. But the truth is, my job didn't allow me to just leave early every day, and she knew that when we got engaged. Things calmed down a bit after that conversation, or at least on the surface. But I still had this feeling in my stomach that something wasn't right. You know, that instinct that tells you something's wrong, but you don't have concrete proof, so you convince yourself you're being paranoid. In May, I had to take a business trip to Chicago for a week, and Cassandra drove me to the airport and kissed me and told me she'd miss me. And I thought, well, maybe I was being paranoid and things are fine. But it turns out the trip got canceled midweek because the client decided to resolve things differently, so I came back home 3 days earlier than planned, like on Wednesday afternoon instead of Saturday. I didn't tell Cassandra because I wanted to surprise her, maybe take her to dinner or something, and when I got to the house like at 4 in the afternoon, her car was in the driveway along with Hunter's old Honda Civic, and I thought, oh great, they're doing pottery or whatever. I'll go in and say hi. The front door was locked, but I had a key, obviously. And when I went in, the house was silent, and there were clothes thrown on the living room floor. Like men's jeans and a woman's blouse I recognized as Cassandra's, and my brain was still trying to process what that meant when I heard noises coming from our bedroom, from our bed, and I literally felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I went up the stairs. I don't know how I managed to move my legs because they felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, and I opened the bedroom door, and there they were. My fiancé and my younger brother, in my bed, doing exactly what you'd think they were doing. I don't know how long I stood there in the doorway before they realized I was there. Maybe it was seconds, but it felt like hours. And when they finally saw me, Cassandra screamed, and Hunter jumped up and started putting on his pants. And the only thing I could think was, this isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was happening. Cassandra was crying and saying, Patrick, I can explain. And Hunter was standing there with this face I don't even know how to describe. Like half guilty, half defiant, and I just completely lost control. I lunged at Hunter and started hitting him. And I know that sounds terrible, and violence is never the answer and all that. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking. I was just feeling this pure rage I'd never experienced before in my life. I got 3 or 4 hits in before Cassandra pulled me away screaming, and Hunter had a bleeding nose and a split lip, and I had sore knuckles. And we were all yelling at the same time. I told Cassandra to get dressed and get out of my house immediately, and she was trying to come closer to me saying she was so sorry, that it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But I didn't want to hear it. I yelled at her that we were done, that the engagement was off, and that I wanted her to get all her stuff out of my house by the weekend, or I was going to throw it in the trash. Hunter left first, still shirtless and holding his nose that wouldn't stop bleeding, and Cassandra stood there crying and begging me to listen to her. But I couldn't even look at her without feeling like throwing up. After they finally left, I sat on the living room floor for I don't know how long. Maybe an hour, maybe 3, just staring at the wall and trying to process what had happened. I called my father, who's the only sane person in my family because my mom is super dramatic about everything, and I told him what happened, and he was quiet for a long moment, and then said, Patrick, I'm so sorry, son, and I started crying for the first time since I was 12 years old, because the combination of hearing my dad's voice being compassionate with me, plus everything that had just happened just broke something inside me. The following days were a total mess. Cassandra kept calling and texting me, and I blocked her number after the second day because I couldn't deal with her apologies. Hunter also tried to contact me, and when I finally responded to one of his messages because he wouldn't stop bothering me, he said we needed to talk in person. And I told him if I saw him again, I was going to end up in jail for homicide. He insisted. And eventually I agreed to meet him at a public cafe because I thought at least there, I couldn't hit him again without getting arrested. That was a week after the incident. And when I arrived at the cafe, Hunter was already there, with a black eye I'd given him and looking miserable. He sat across from me and started with this speech about how sorry he was, that he hadn't planned for it to happen, that it just happened, and I told him to save the excuses because I wasn't interested. Then he dropped the bomb that he was in love with Cassandra, that they'd been seeing each other since February, 4 months, and that it wasn't just sex, that they really had a connection. I asked him if he realized how sick that was, that I was going to marry her, that he was my brother, and he said, I know, but I can't help how I feel. He showed me his phone with messages between him and Cassandra. I don't know why, maybe to prove his point or something. And there were literally hundreds of messages saying, I love you and I miss you and all those things she should have been saying to me, not to my brother. I told him I never wanted to see him again, that to me he was basically dead, and I got up and left the cafe without looking back. I thought that would be the end of the whole nightmare, that I could move on with my life, cancel the wedding, get over the betrayal, and eventually be okay. But things got worse, much worse. Because like a month later, my mother called me and told me Cassandra was pregnant with Hunter's baby, and that my brother was going to be a father, and that she hoped I could forgive them because family is the most important thing. She literally said that to me. That family is the most important thing. As if they hadn't just destroyed mine in the worst possible way. I told my mother that if she was going to support what Hunter and Cassandra did, then she was dead to me too. And she got hysterical, saying I was being dramatic and vindictive, that Hunter made a mistake, but he's my brother and needs my support in this difficult time. Can you believe it? Hunter needed my support because he was going to have a baby with my ex-fiancée. My mother kept saying I was selfish, that I couldn't see beyond my own pain, that Hunter was scared because he didn't have a stable job and I didn't know how he was going to support a baby, and I told her that wasn't my problem, that he should have thought about that before sleeping with my fiancé. I hung up the phone and blocked her number too. My father called me after that trying to mediate, saying he understood my pain but that maybe with time I could consider forgiving. And I told him I appreciated that he wasn't automatically on Hunter's side like my mother. But no, I was never going to forgive this. I explained that it wasn't just about the cheating, that people cheat and couples sometimes get over it, but this was my brother, someone who was supposed to have my back. And also my family was choosing to support him instead of acknowledging that what he did was wrong. My father sighed and said, Okay, Patrick, I'm not going to pressure you. I just want you to know I'll always be here for you. And that was enough for me, knowing that at least my dad wasn't completely crazy. In July, 2 months after all the drama, my mother called me from my father's phone because she knew I had her number blocked, and told me Hunter and Cassandra were getting married, that she was organizing a small ceremony at her house, and that she really hoped I would go because it was important for Hunter to have his family there. I told her they could do whatever they wanted, but I wasn't going to be present, and she started crying, saying I was breaking her heart. How could I be so cruel to my own brother at such an important moment? I told her that what was cruel was what they did to me, not what I was doing to them by setting boundaries, and I hung up. My father called me later, apologizing for lending his phone to my mom, and I told him it was okay. I understood, but I needed him to respect my decision not to have contact with Hunter or my mother. They got married in August, the same month Cassandra and I were supposed to get married, and my mother posted photos on Facebook of the ceremony, of Cassandra with her pregnant belly, of Hunter looking proud, and I deleted my mother from all my social media because I didn't need to see that. Some mutual friends contacted me afterwards, asking if I was okay, because they'd seen the photos and knew what had happened, and I told them I was fine, that I just needed time and space to heal. The truth is, I wasn't fine. I was drinking more than I should. I wasn't sleeping well, and my work was starting to suffer because I couldn't concentrate. But eventually, with therapy and time, I started feeling better, or at least functional. I decided I needed a complete change, so I applied for a transfer at my firm to an office in another city, like 5 hours from where my family lived, and I moved in September, like 3 months after the complete disaster. The new city was bigger. Nobody knew me there, and I could basically start from scratch. I kept talking to my father. We'd call each other every 2 weeks or so, and he kept me updated on some things but respected that I didn't want to know anything about Hunter or my mother. He told me in December that Cassandra had had the baby, a girl they named Stella, and that my mother was helping a lot because Hunter still didn't have a stable job and Cassandra was trying to get back into the legal field, but it was hard with a baby. I told my father I was glad for them, I guess, but that information didn't change anything for me. Months passed, then a year passed, then 2 years, and I completely rebuilt my life. I started dating again, made new friends at work, bought an apartment in a nice building near downtown, and honestly, I was in the best mental and emotional place I'd been in a long time. I was still angry when I thought about what had happened, and probably always would be, but it was no longer that consuming rage that kept me up at nights. It was more like a scar, you know, something that would always be there but didn't hurt constantly anymore. Then, like 6 months ago, on a Saturday morning in April, someone knocked on my door, and when I opened it, it was Cassandra standing there with a little girl in her arms, and my brain took a second to process what I was seeing, because I didn't expect to ever see her again in my life. Cassandra looked terrible, like she'd lost a lot of weight, had dark circles, her clothes were wrinkled, and the girl, Stella, I guess, was like 2.5 years old and was crying. Cassandra said, "Patrick, I need your help." And I said, "How did you get my address?" And she said, "Your father gave it to me," and I felt my blood boiling again after so long. I asked her what the hell she was doing at my door after 3 years of no contact, and she started crying, saying Hunter had abandoned them, that he left 2 months ago and she didn't know where he was, that she had no money, that my mother had been helping them but couldn't anymore, and that she had no one else to turn to. I told her that wasn't my problem, that she and Hunter made their choices and now had to live with the consequences. And she said, "Please, Patrick, it's not for me, it's for Stella. She's not to blame for any of this." I told her that wasn't my responsibility either, that Stella wasn't my daughter, and that she needed to leave my apartment. Cassandra pulled a letter from her bag and gave it to me, and said it was from my mother. And when I opened it, it said something like, "Patrick, I know we've grown apart, but this is your chance to do the right thing. Cassandra and Stella need help, and you have the means to help them. She's your niece, even if you don't want to acknowledge it. And I need you to be the man I know you are, and support them in this difficult time." Literally, my mother was asking me to take care of my ex-fiancée and the daughter she had with my brother after betraying me in the most horrible way possible. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was so absurd I could only laugh, and Cassandra was looking at me like I was the villain of the story. I told Cassandra to wait. A moment. Went into my apartment, got my checkbook, and wrote her a check for $5,000. I went back to the door, gave her the check, and told her, "This is all you're going to get from me. Use it to find a place to stay, for food, for whatever you need, but don't contact me ever again." She said $5,000 wasn't enough, that she needed ongoing help until she found work, and I told her then she needed to find Hunter and sue him for child support, or ask my mother for more help, or find any other solution that didn't involve me. I told her she'd destroyed my life once, and I wasn't going to let her do it again, and I closed the door while she was still trying to talk. I immediately called my father. I was furious and told him how dare he give my address to Cassandra after I'd trusted him with that information, that he was literally the only person in my family I still had contact with, and he'd betrayed that trust. My father tried to explain that Cassandra was desperate, that my mother had pressured him a lot, that he thought maybe with time and seeing the child I might soften, and I told him I wasn't interested in his excuses, that if he wanted to continue being part of my life, he needed to respect my boundaries, and that this included not sharing my information with people I specifically didn't want to know where I lived. I told him I needed time to think about whether I could forgive this betrayal, and he said he understood, that he was very sorry, and I hung up. I didn't talk to my father for 2 weeks after that. I was processing everything again and finally decided I would forgive him, but this would be the last chance. And if something like this happened again, I would cut contact permanently. When I told my therapist about this, she asked me if I felt bad about how I'd handled the situation with Cassandra, if I felt guilty about Stella, and the truth is, no, I didn't feel guilty at all. I didn't choose for that child to be born, didn't choose the situation she was in, and it wasn't my responsibility to fix the mess her parents created. I thought that after giving Cassandra the check and making it clear I didn't want more contact, that would be the end. But no. Because like 2 weeks after that encounter, she started sending me messages from a new number, saying the money had already run out, that she needed more help, that please consider being part of Stella's life because she deserved to have uncles and family. I blocked that number too. Then she started sending me emails, and I marked them as spam. Then she showed up at my work, and I had to talk to security so they wouldn't let her up to my floor. It was like being stalked, and I finally had to threaten with a restraining order for her to stop. I told my father what was happening, and he talked to my mother, and my mother told him I was a heartless monster. How could I turn my back on my family like that? and all those dramatic things she's so good at saying. My father defended my position this time. Told my mother I had every right not to want to get involved, that Hunter and Cassandra needed to solve their own problems, and that she needed to stop pressuring me. That caused a huge fight between my parents, to the point that my mother went to stay with Hunter and Cassandra for a while, wherever they were living, and my father called me thanking me that at least that gave him some peace in his house, which was sad but also kind of funny. Like 2 months ago, I decided I wanted to close this chapter completely. Not just ignore Cassandra until she gave up, but give her a definitive solution that would also get her out of my life forever. So I asked a friend who's a private investigator to find Hunter, because apparently nobody in the family really knew where he was, just that he'd gone to another city to look for work or something. My friend found him in 3 days. He was living in a city like 8 hours from here, working in construction or something, and had a Facebook profile where he was literally posting photos with another woman, like he already had a new relationship just 2 months after abandoning Cassandra and his daughter. I sent Hunter's address and phone number to Cassandra by email, along with a message telling her there was the person who should really be helping her, that she needed to hire a family lawyer and sue Hunter for child support and for abandonment, that with the check I'd given her plus maybe a loan from my mother, she should have enough to start the legal process. I told her this was my last act of help, and that after this I would cut all contact permanently. That she should block my number, my emails, not try to find me, because if she did, I would proceed with the restraining order I'd threatened before. I also transferred her another $2,000, not because I felt I owed it to her, but because I wanted to be able to sleep at night knowing I'd done more than any reasonable person I would do in my situation, and that after this, I didn't owe anything to anyone. I told her to use that money for lawyer fees, for whatever she needed to get settled, and that would be the last time she'd hear from me. Cassandra responded with a long email thanking me, saying she understood my position, that she never stopped feeling terrible about what she did, and that she hoped someday I could find the peace and happiness I deserved. I didn't respond to that email. I just archived it and blocked her in every possible way. I told my father all this, and he said he was proud of how I'd handled the situation, that I'd been more generous than Hunter or Cassandra deserved, and that he hoped I could finally put all this behind me. I told him I hoped so too, but that he needed to understand that my mother and Hunter were still persona non grata in my life, that I didn't want updates about them. Didn't want to know if my mother was upset with me or if Hunter had finally matured or anything like that. My father said he understood, and that he would respect that from now on. So here I am, 3 years after the worst day of my life, living in a new city, with a successful career, good friends, and finally feeling like I'm in control of my life again. Do I regret how I handled things? No, honestly I don't. Do I sometimes think about Stella and wonder how she's doing? Sometimes yes, it's inevitable, but that doesn't mean it's my responsibility to change my whole life for a situation I didn't create. People tell me I'm harsh, that I have no heart, that family should always forgive. But those people weren't there when I found my fiancé and brother in my bed. I didn't hear my mother telling me I should support Hunter, weren't stalked by Cassandra after making it clear I didn't want contact. Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. Saying no when people try to take advantage of you doesn't make you cruel. And cutting toxic relationships, even if their family doesn't, make you a monster. I've had to repeat that to myself many times over the last 3 years because the guilt is real. Especially when there's a child involved who didn't ask to be born into this terrible situation. But at the end of the day, I can't save everyone, and I shouldn't have to sacrifice my mental peace and well-being for people who showed they don't care about me. The last time I heard anything about Hunter was like a month ago. My father mentioned in passing that Cassandra finally found him thanks to the information I gave her, that she's suing him for child support, and that he's fighting it saying he has no money, that his salary barely covers him, all the typical excuses of irresponsible parents. My father also told me, my mother is furious with me for helping Cassandra find Hunter, that she says, I'm trying to get my brother in trouble, and I could only laugh because my mother's logic is truly incomprehensible, like, Hunter creates a baby and then abandons that baby and its mother. But I'm the bad guy for helping to make him responsible for his actions. My father asked me if I wanted him to talk to my mother, and I said no, that I really don't care what she thinks of me at this point. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if that business trip hadn't been canceled, if I hadn't come home that day, if I'd never discovered them. Would they have continued the affair until the wedding? Would I have married Cassandra without knowing she was cheating on me with my brother? Would I have lived years in a lie? Probably yes. And honestly, I don't know which scenario is worse, living deceived or living with the truth, but with all this betrayal and pain. I guess the truth is better, even if it hurts, because at least now I can make decisions based on real information and not on lies. 3.5 years have passed since I discovered Cassandra and Hunter together, and although most of the time I'm fine, sometimes I still feel that pang of pain. When I see engaged couples or when someone mentions family topics, my therapist says I'll probably always have those emotional scars, that traumatic events like this aren't completely overcome, but you learn to live with them. And I guess she's right. I've dated some people since then. Nothing serious yet because I still have trust issues I'm working on in therapy, but I'm better than I was 3 years ago, and that's what matters. The only thing I know for sure is that I made the right decisions for me, that I don't owe anything to Hunter or Cassandra or my mother, and that if I could go back and change something, I probably wouldn't change anything except maybe having realized the betrayal earlier. But you can't change the past. You can only learn from it and move forward. And that's exactly what I'm doing.